You ever have a moment where you read something or you hear something and something just calls you to share it? Well, this is one of those moments. In a conflict management class, I was uh, I was tasked to read this and summarize or give a reflection report on it. Please, before writing, before protesting, before getting enraged or being caught by any type of emotion with the current events going on, maybe take a few moments and listen to this. It ain't gonna do nothing but take a couple of minutes of your time. But I feel like everybody needs to hear this. At least once a year, I Google Amish schoolhouse shooting and read about the Pennsylvania tragedy in 2006 when a man walked into an Amish school and shot 10 girls between the ages of 6 and 13. He killed 5 of the girls and severely wounded the 5 others before killing himself. Though it might sound morbid to revisit such a horrific event with regularity, reading about the Amish community's response to the shooting always lifts me up and reconnects me to what I believe to be true: that nothing is unforgivable and that everyone is worthy of forgiveness. Members of the Amish community didn't just forgive the man who shot their daughters, they visited with and comforted his wife and parents in the hours and days following the murders. Many members of the community attended the shooter's funeral, set up a charitable fund to help support his family. The Amish didn't just believe in forgiveness, they practiced it. They lived it. They refuted the claims of an entire nation that deemed the crime unforgivable and showed the world what forgiveness looked like. I cry every time I read about their kindness in the face of such sorrow. I'm always overwhelmed by the breadth of their compassion, steadfast in my belief that human beings committed to love, without exception, can create the most profound miracles and effect the most necessary change. We can love everyone and forgive everything if we dedicate ourselves to that possibility. It's this dedication, above all, that stands to heal our world. I have 4 distinct memories from my mom and dad's funeral when I was 14. I remember sitting at the funeral home as hundreds of people paraded past my parents' closed coffins to pay their respects. The only face I recall is that of my classmate, Jody Goldberg, whose eyes caught mine as she waited in line. She gave me a nervous, sympathetic wave. I stared for a second and then looked down at my lap. I also remember crying in the side room, away from all the mourners, with 2 of my sisters standing nearby. I overheard one sister tell the other she didn't know how I, the baby of the family and devoted mama's boy, would be able to survive without our mom. I didn't know either. How would I? How could I? The third thing I remember was the moment before my parents' caskets were going to be carried off. I leapt from my chair and threw myself against my mother's casket, screaming and crying so they wouldn't take her away. Mom, no! Mom, no! I remember shouting over and over, not willing to say goodbye. One of my brothers, I'm not sure which one, pulled me off and led me out of the room. And incredibly, I don't know if that last scene really happened or if I saw it in a movie or read it somewhere and owned it for myself. I can see the moment in my mind and feel it in my bones, but there's a part of me that questions whether it actually took place. It feels much more dramatic than I knew myself to be. Of course, many things I thought I knew about myself changed when my parents died. I was one Scott the day before their death and a different one the day after. An orphan can never be the same person he was with his parents. The day of the funeral and the weeks around it are mostly lost to me. Still, I have that vision of myself, body pressed against her coffin, screaming, arms outstretched, holding on to a little more time with her. I've never asked my siblings if it happened because I don't want to know if I made it up. I want my last memory with my mom to be real. The last thing I remember that day was being in the funeral home parking lot with my 3 brothers. They were talking and smoking as I sat on the ledge staring at the ground with one thought in my mind: I will never forgive my father for my mother's death. Luckily for me, I didn't end up keeping that promise. The man who killed my parents was caught and sent to prison for life. He's still there. I have a vague memory of being at his sentencing with my siblings. I don't know why we were there, really. I'm not sure what difference it made to anyone. Maybe we wanted the judge to see our devastated family so that he wouldn't be lenient in his sentencing, or we wanted our parents' killer to see the faces of the 7 orphans he'd created so that he couldn't ignore the magnitude of his crime. Perhaps his sentencing promised the only closure my older siblings knew they would find within their grief. Being present for his conviction provided a breath of relief within a universe of hopelessness. With Mom and Dad's killer off to prison, we could at least lock away that part of the horror. Though that day remains a blur, my parents' murderer does not. I remember his name, of course, and even his face, sometimes more clearly than I remember my parents' faces. Maybe because his actions, even more than my parents' up until that point, impacted most profoundly the person I would become. He had changed my life more than anyone. He had taught me the meaning of loss and introduced me to unimaginable grief. He had turned me into an orphan overnight. Even so, I forgive him. I forgive the man who killed my parents completely and without reservation. I forgave him a long time ago, but not until years after he took their lives and uprooted mine. Not until I simmered in blame and rage and fantasized all the violent ways I would have loved to take revenge. Not before I quieted my fury by imagining his troubled life to that point, and the saddened loved ones he would likely never see again. I forgave him many years ago, but not until I learned that forgiveness of others is the only chance that lives in love, and that love is the only choice I want to live by. To love is to forgive. To forgive is to love. I don't see exceptions, not where my heart is concerned. I don't believe any of the justifications I produce for not forgiving. The only way something could be unforgivable is if I'm not loving enough to forgive it. If the darkness that lives within someone's actions proves greater than the light that lives within my heart, I'm not willing to accept that. I won't discount the strength of my love for anything or anyone. I used to think my parents' murder was unforgivable. For many years, I didn't even consider the possibility of forgiving their killer. It didn't register as an option. Not when he'd done something so profoundly terrible. When I thought about him, which wasn't that often, I hated him, and I was fine with that. He deserved it, I thought. But it felt awful to rest in a state of hatred and rage. It hurt. I grew to understand that to feel more at peace with myself, I would need to find a greater sense of peace with him. Without knowing how I'd find my way there, I eventually considered the possibility of forgiveness. What did I have to lose? How do you forgive? People ask me that question a lot. Some have struggled to forgive ex-spouses who treated them horribly, while others refuse to forgive friends who betrayed them. Abusive bosses, backstabbing colleagues, selfish parents, thoughtless children, corrupt politicians, greedy executives, bigoted neighbors, all have provoked in us the need and inability to forgive. Is there someone in your life right now you have yet to forgive? Or someone from your past you refuse to forgive? Maybe you don't think they deserve it. Maybe you want to forgive them but don't know how. Maybe you've tried and failed. I wish I had an answer that guaranteed success, but I'm not sure a definitive path to forgiveness exists beyond a clear commitment to it. We have to want to give it in order to find it. If we don't, we'll never really start searching. There are loads of articles, books, and videos that promise to guide us to forgiveness, and that no doubt offer some valuable tools to help us along the way. Still, all the best forgiveness recommendations in the world won't make a bit of difference if we stay committed to the belief that something is unforgivable. We won't climb a mountain we have determined to be unclimbable. Once we shift that belief and truly want to forgive someone for what he's done, even if that's solely for our peace of mind, our desire alone will likely lead us there. My desire has. Forgiveness takes dedication and awareness, and it takes work. I know that when I haven't found forgiveness, I'm operating from my mind and not my heart, from fear and not love, which means I have more work to do, more truth to uncover. I understand my inability to forgive means I'm lost in the hopelessness of the past rather than the possibility of the present, a slave to blame rather than a master of acceptance. When we continue to blame others for their past actions, no matter how hurtful and how those actions still affect us today, we hand over the power of responsibility for our lives. We give someone else control. When we root ourselves in the present moment, no longer victims to our painful past, we take ownership of our reality and eliminate the possibility of blame. There is no place for blame in forgiveness, and no path to forgiveness through blame. If blame were the path, I suspect we'd all be master forgivers. More than anything else, I've found empathy and compassion to be the most direct paths to forgiveness. Can we put ourselves in the shoes of those who have hurt us? Can we try to connect to their struggles and pain, and the degree to which that pain plays a part in the choices they make? I can't imagine actually killing another human being, but I know what it's like to feel such rage towards someone you wish they would die a painful death. I know what it's like to feel unworthy and unseen. I know what it's like to feel used and betrayed, lost and desperate. I may not understand what it takes to cross the line to violence, but I can certainly relate to all the emotions that bring people there. We all have everything inside of us. We are all beautiful and vile, grounded and unstable, whole and broken. We're all human. When we understand that, and when we're willing to see ourselves in others, and others in ourselves, through the lens of love, we walk the paths of empathy and compassion, both of which lead to a greater possibility for forgiveness. I worked hard to empathize with the man who killed my parents. No one who is operating from any place of self-love or self-respect could walk into a market, pull out a gun, and shoot innocent people. I tried to imagine the life he'd led up until he shot them. How much sadness and desperation must he have felt? How much confusion and rage? I connected to those hurt places inside me that I'm guessing aren't much different from the hurt places inside him or inside anyone. I understood that no matter how ugly and misguided his actions were, pain led him to do what he did. I settled into my compassion for him as a fellow human being struggling like all of us to find his way in this difficult world. Then, eventually, forgiveness found me. I began to notice I could think about him with love and compassion instead of blame and rage. Something inside me had shifted completely and resolutely. Love had worked its magic, so I forgave him. Not just for myself, but for him. Surely he needed compassion as much as we all do, whether or not he asked for it. No matter what choices he'd made in his life, he was no less worthy of love than any one of us, nor could he ever be. That's one birthright we all share as human beings. To forgive someone does not mean we accept, support, or in any way condone his actions. Forgiveness has nothing to do with another person and the hurtful or horrific things they've done. As with our kindness, compassion, and authenticity, our forgiveness can only be found within us and can never be dependent on others. Whether or not they are remorseful for their actions, or have asked for our forgiveness, or are even aware that we've forgiven them, none of that matters, not according to love. Love compels us to forgive no matter what. No conditions, no excuses, no exceptions. I don't know if the man who killed my parents feels remorse for what he did, or if he's asked for forgiveness. Those choices have everything to do with his own healing, his own heart, and nothing to do with mine. My heart tells me to love him and to forgive him, so I do. In one of my workshops, I met a woman who had suffered horrible abuse at the hands of her stepfather for many years when she was a child. Once the workshop had ended, she pulled me aside. "What if I don't want to forgive that monster?" she asked me, disgust and anger in her voice. You don't have to, I responded. No one has to forgive anyone if they don't want to. That's up to you. But if you're still carrying around so much anger over the abuse all these years later, and if that anger is negatively affecting your day-to-day life, finding forgiveness may be the one path that lifts you beyond the rage. Forgiveness may be the one choice that finally sets you free. Maybe. She didn't buy it, and that's okay. Forgiveness cannot be forced, particularly when we see no reason to act on it. We can only forgive if and when we're ready to forgive, and only when we stop believing in the unforgivable. But deciding not to forgive someone doesn't make you a bad, incomplete, spiritually uninvolved person. We do what we can do. I have a close friend who has no intention of forgiving her ex-boyfriend for all his lying and cheating while they were together. She sees his actions as unforgivable, but she's happily married now and has moved on with her life. She won't forgive her ex, but she doesn't think about him each day and simmer in rage over how he treated her. She doesn't give him that power anymore. The woman in the workshop, as far as I could tell, still allowed her stepfather to determine her happiness, even though she hadn't spoken to him in decades. His actions still held power over her. In my experience, the surest way to get beyond the pain of something we see as unforgivable is to find a way to forgive, if, for nothing else, our own mental health and well-being. A willingness to forgive reflects a desire to take care of ourselves. We all know what it feels like to hold on to hatred and blame. It's the worst kind of poison. It clouds everything. The more we resist the possibility of forgiveness, the more we invite the probability of unhappiness. We allow for a toxic reality that only forgiveness can clear. By forgiving others, we lift the cloud. Though we may never understand why they did what they did, or in any way condone their actions, or want anything to do with them moving forward, our forgiveness untethers us from the negative bonds of others and from the victimhood of the pain they caused us. Forgiveness opens the door to a different kind of freedom. For many years after my parents' death, I couldn't forgive myself for not begging my mom harder to quit her job at the market where they were killed. I hated that she worked in a crime-ridden neighborhood, and I was often afraid for her safety. I believed I could have spared her that fate if only I had done more to convince her to quit. I still believe that possibility, but I don't blame at all myself for her death anymore. I've forgiven myself for not pushing her harder than I did, only after years of condemning myself first. Self-forgiveness is tough, often more difficult than forgiving someone else. Self-everything is tough, isn't it? We can be brutal with ourselves. Self-forgiveness requires the same dedication, compassion, and love we show others when we forgive them. Can we be kind enough to view our own choices the way we would the choices of those we love the most? Can we really forgive ourselves for everything we believe we've done? Yes, we can, with willingness, commitment, and work. We've all made terrible decisions that have created unnecessary struggle in our lives. We've all stayed silent when we should have spoken up or raised our voices when the moment called for silence. We've all caused our loved ones pain and sometimes even hurt them intentionally. We've all abused our minds and bodies, refusing to care for them in a healthy way. We've all thought hateful things about those we love and those we don't even know. We're human beings, which means we've made a banquet of bad choices and will likely make plenty more in the future. All fodder for self-forgiveness. If you have forgiven yourself for anything, then it's in you to forgive yourself for everything. The compassion you've shown others, you must show yourself. If you believe in God, then you are a child of God, and as such, you are as worthy of love and forgiveness as anyone who has ever lived. If you don't believe in God, then you are a child of nature, and as such, you are as worthy of love and forgiveness as anyone who has ever lived. Nothing you have done in your entire life lives outside the bounds of forgiveness. Nothing. If you haven't already, it's time to forgive yourself for everything. Imagine carrying such a depth of love and compassion for humanity that no matter what someone did to you or anyone else, no matter how horrible or hurtful, you could look him or her in the eyes and with sincerity declare, I love you and I forgive you. I feel your pain as I feel mine, and I recognize your need to heal as much as I recognize my own. I believe that potential lies within each of us, and within that potential, miracles blossom and humanity changes. Their daughters murdered forced the Pennsylvania Amish community to face the conviction of their beliefs, and they chose to forgive. My parents' murder forced me to face a circumstance that most, including myself, had deemed unforgivable, and yet, with a deep commitment to love, I found my way to forgiveness. What a gift it was to know I could make that choice, and that I can continue to choose forgiveness moving forward. Forgiveness is one of the greatest gifts we can give ourselves and each other. It is one of the mandates of love and one of the cornerstones of freedom, mine and yours. I forgave my father for insisting that my mother work in such a dangerous environment, the same way I forgave their killer by doing my best to put myself in my father's shoes and connect with him, not as my dad, but as another human being, doing what he could to make a living and to make sense of our crazy world. He made so many awful choices as a father and a husband, but I know he never wanted harm to come to any of us, most certainly not my mom. Though I couldn't connect to many of his decisions, I could connect to his humanity, and with compassion, I forgave him. Hundreds of cars lined up at my parents' funeral. The procession stretched for blocks. My mom and dad touched many people from all walks of life. I don't think I fully understood their impact until I saw the number of family and friends who showed up to mourn them. I didn't know just how generous they had been with their support and their love. I wouldn't realize for many years that perhaps the greatest lesson they taught me, by example, was to accept and respect whomever crossed your path and to be a compassionate friend to those in need. That lesson, like my parents, will live on in me forever. Please share this, everybody. I'm going to put the link so you can download it for yourself. It's a good reality check that I think we all need to just take a step back and just really analyze the situation and realize that we're all human beings underneath. Y'all be safe.